Okay, it is now September 2nd, and I guess, well, the food riots didn't happen, which is good. That means it's not this year. So, but 365 days goes by pretty quick, as we all know. So, but anyway, there was a few things I wanted to go over that I didn't quite catch on the last couple of videos because I ran, the camera stopped and it got dark or whatever. But I was going to continue on with what Chuck was talking about in his layout, in his outline of what God gave him. And I was going to continue on with that. So, I think, and I have a couple other things to go over too, from a Vicky Parnell, who back on the 7th of August received a dream, and it was pretty extensive, about a meeting she had with the President of the United States, and what she went through with that, and what she told him. And I don't believe it's the president we now have. I'll just put it that way. Just by the description of the demeanor of the man. So, and it was a man. Anyway, so don't get too excited, you know. But it was a man. So the Lord wants us to look to Him, you know, not to a man. Is what I'm getting at. So, where was I? Okay, I started out with the second year of events, I believe, and I was at a point where it was right before this large earthquake hits the Midwest. Okay, so I'll start there. A giant earthquake strikes the Midwest, and literally the whole continent is shaken by the intensity of the earthquake. The Midwestern United States is devastated. Some of this is a little review, but I'll get on with it. According to other pages, this is a note. This happens at noon on July 5th of the second year of this scenario, which, if you read Revelation 18, seems to indicate something like a meteor hitting water that would relate to this. The Russians and the Chinese, Japan to tag along, have been formulating contingency plans to deal with the United States. Plans aiming at long-range wearing down the United States that require close cooperation. Like I said before, this has already been happening. I don't want to be too repetitive here. It appears to be the opportunity they were looking for. Okay, 30 days after the Midwestern United States earthquake, the Lord sends His angels to warn His children to flee, and 7 days later, Russia and China pressed the buttons, launching a full thermonuclear attack on the United States. This would equate to August 11th, and I checked out the calendar, and it does the 10th, 11th, somewhere in there, and I believe it'll be at night. So, the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Forces are dealt death blows. Major cities are destroyed. The United States returns a hard punch at Russia, much to their surprise. Russia weathers the counterattack with strength, and within 2 months invades. So, August, September, October. Russian amphibious and airborne troops invade the east coast of the United States at 5 points. 2 points north of New York City and 3 points south of New York City. Southern Florida and parts of Louisiana and Alabama are underwater and cease to exist. So it could have been from the impact of all these weapons hitting in a relatively tight area on the earth. It causes some seismic disruption, and somehow a good portion of Florida sinks in some other states. And there could have been also possibly a meteor hit, and I believe it was somewhere just west of, northwest of one of our territories out there. I can't think of the name of it now, but it's helpful to have a map, but I don't have a map out here. So, U.S. Army fights hard and manages to contain the Russian invasion points, but then heavy Russian attacks break out of one bridgehead and they sweep towards the destroyed Philadelphia area. U.S. armies are threatened from the rear. Attempts to stem the Russian advance fail. One of the places that they invade on the East Coast is a place called Slaughter Beach in Delaware, and it's called Slaughter Beach. But it's a good spot there because there's a highway not too far away that just drives right up into Philadelphia, and they want to keep Philadelphia intact because they want to utilize the port and the airstrips and all that. So, and possibly other reasons too, like seizing some of the more important historical things we have there. But anyway, the president and the government abandon Washington, D.C. The U.S. Army retreat to a defensive line being set up in the Appalachian Mountains. Japan, an uneasy ally at first, is greatly encouraged by the course of the war. Japan moves quickly with China, and a month after the Russian invasion of the East Coast, Chinese troops with Japanese troops invade the West Coast of the United States. Note, he says October 21st is the date of the first invasion, so the second must be in November for the West Coast. The invasion happens at three widely separated points on California and Washington state coastlines. At first, the U.S. Armed Forces stop them. One Chinese invasion beachhead near San Francisco is wiped out, but then with considerable strength, the Chinese and Japanese crush the U.S. defense and sweep inland. Russia invades and annexes Alaska and slaughters much of the population deliberately. I'm going to make a note here. In California, okay, in Washington State, there was I don't know if it was Chuck who had it, maybe it was Chuck. There was a circumstance where some, I guess, California National Guardsmen got together after they saw all this going on, and an officer rallied the troops basically, and they prayed, and then they went off and this invasion force, because they were going off to rescue some Christians that this officer knew of that were stranded and in harm's way, and they were making calls and appealing to somebody to come get them. Now, these people should have left earlier. The Lord had warned them, but they did not leave. And but in His mercy, He does allow this force to come and rescue them. And in the process, they pick them up and then they roll back toward the mountains. And the mountains end up being the refuge for these people and others as well. So that's just something to keep in your mind if you're in California. And let's say you're accustomed to living in the city a lot. It might be a good idea to go out and learn a little bit about how to camp out and how to survive in the woods, and how to deal with that. Maybe do a little recon and go check it out. Take a drive up there, and maybe if you can afford it, get a piece of property, and be there for the folks that are going to be coming. Set up a little haven. Ask the Lord, and He'll guide you what to do. But there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be needing help, and that's why we're here, really. So, to provide you with a way to get there, and before all this happens, because I think we still have a little time. Okay, not a whole lot of time, but and the way things are going, things are only going to get more expensive and harder to acquire. So now would be the time to do that. Keep a low profile and just do some prepping. Make sure you have a sound vehicle and plenty of fuel to get there. And maybe there's a friend or two on the way, that you can store stuff and pick it up later, or make a plan. Network, get some phone calls going. Anyway, so anyway, something about the kids. You've got kids, little ones. Make sure they have something that's familiar to them. Take something that they can focus on, they can play with, and something that'll give them some comfort and keep their mind occupied a little bit. And I don't mean a game. I'm talking about something else. Something useful. But it might be a favorite blanket. I don't know, a favorite doll, stuffed animal, or something. But think about them while you're planning. Okay, it just sort of came to me. All right, so. Where was I? Okay. Hawaii surrenders to Japan intact. Hawaii surrenders to Japan intact, and China jointly occupies with Japan. The U.S. Army is pressed back on every front. Washington, D.C. is ruined and falls into Russian hands. The president and the government move west and set up the seat of government in Kansas and the Dakotas. The U.S. industrial base is largely destroyed, although smaller factories are opening up in small towns everywhere. A severe fuel shortage cripples every front, every effort. The U.S. Air Force is outnumbered and outclassed, and Russian and Chinese aircraft control the skies over every battlefield. The U.S. Navy is destroyed or surrendered. The president tries to arrange peace terms, but neither Russia, China, nor Japan will respond, and the war goes on. All now smell the blood of the United States and are closing in for the kill. France, Great Britain, and Italy form a coalition alliance, and U.S. armies are asked to leave Europe. Spain, West Germany, Holland, Sweden, Luxembourg, Norway, and Portugal become loose allies in a mutual defense pact. So I would say that something happened in NATO. Okay. Here the Lord does not make it clear. It seems vague to me with a lack of definition, says this fellow. Yet the Lord makes it clear that Western Europe will not be involved in the war and will elect to stay out of the war and will remain neutral. North Korea will attack South Korea. China attacks Taiwan. Stock markets crash and jail. Now I have some information about North Korea, China and Taiwan anyway, and the upcoming attack on Taiwan by China. And a little letter a fellow wrote to some congressmen. Anyway, great inflation, massive food shortages, massive unemployment, starvation starts. Chicago's destroyed completely by the earthquake. Lake Michigan will plummet the city. 62 million will die because of this earthquake, and it will be felt 500 miles around from the city. I would imagine pretty darn hard. 80% of the homes in America will be without heat in the wintertime, and with little food, millions will starve to death. Okay, third year begins. Jesus calls this winter harsh and horrible. Another bitter cold winter with more hardships than ever before. Cold, death, and destruction prevail. During winter, Russian and Chinese, Japanese armies are stopped respectively in the Appalachian Mountain Range and the Rocky Mountain Range. Now think about this. This is if the Chinese come in November, okay, and then winter, it's already started pretty much. It was beginning to, and then you've got December, January, and part of February, the winter. So this is shortly after the invasion, really, and due to the winter, they get locked up in the Appalachian Mountains. And, things are hard for both sides. The U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force recover some strength and launch desperate attacks aimed at driving the Russian armies out. The Russians hold the ground they have taken. Russia hits several places with nuclear devices, but now refrains from overuse of nuclear weapons. The U.S. Army is hungry and cannot re-equip like the enemy forces, and our supplies dwindle in battles. Losses cannot be replaced. In the spring of the third year, Russia, China, and Japan will launch coordinated attacks. Russia will break through at 2 points in the north and south, while China and Japan will break through at 3 points. Russia will move swiftly against bitter resistance, driving west and southwest. Attempts by the U.S. Army to establish a line of defense fail. Russians advance rapidly into Iowa, Missouri areas. Their deepest penetration happens in Kansas before the war ends. And that's where the seat of government is going to be, or the United States government. Fighting hard, the U.S. Army and government encircled in the central United States and attacked without mercy. The invaders attack and slaughter U.S. armed forces, and the U.S. Army collapses. Many surrender. Many run to the hills, and much of the government gives up. No surrenders ever signed. There is a general collapse of organized resistance. Late spring into early summer, all major fighting will cease, and the Russian, Chinese, and Japanese soldiers with their allies will dance and sing for joy. For the United States is destroyed and occupied. There will be no slaughter in the mainland as in Alaska. Very many soldiers and civilians of the United States will be taken to Russia and Eastern Europe to work as slave labor in rebuilding destroyed cities. Later, many will be allowed to return home, although not all will come back. The Chinese will not at first take prisoners. After meeting bitter resistance, they will change this policy. Russia, China, and Japan will strip the land of industrial tools, machinery, and goods. Only Russia will take large numbers as slaves. China will take scientists and technicians. The occupying armies will leave populated areas largely intact, using local people to extract raw materials and goods, such as are available. No effort to rebuild or restore the nation will be allowed. God will, by the Holy Spirit, bring or cause the occupying armies to have compassion on the holy seed, the remnant, the Christians. Nevertheless, persecution will begin once Russian, Chinese, and Japanese communist officials or commissars replace army officers. Late in the first year of occupation, the drought will begin to ease. The temperatures will also ease somewhat. The world will be in great fear of this Russian, China, and Japan union. Canada is intact, although suffering from famine, bad weather, and disease. War will come to them later, and much of the nation will be destroyed. The Japanese and Chinese alliance grows stronger and fast. Russia is now becoming afraid of them, even though Russia is stronger. Russian oil resources decline seriously, and there is severe trouble in the nation. China and Japan move to block the Russian threat to Israel, and now a much stronger European alliance joins to back also. Everything has to do with the Antichrist making a deal with Israel. Russian power is in a state of decline. Russia tries to take Israel. War breaks out. China and Japan join with the Western Europe, engage Russia. To Russia's surprise, Russia is overwhelmed and destroyed utterly as a world power. Israel survives. Okay, now it gets into toward the end of the occupation of the United States. At this point, the leader of the land, this guy's been anointed years ago. They call him codename Jeffrey. Nobody really knows his name. Chuck knew him, but Chuck's passed away now. And anyway, but the Lord knows where he is. And he's going to do something pretty good. Christians suffer severe persecution in Jeffrey's town as elsewhere. Jeffrey takes his family and flees into the hills and joins an army band of guerrillas. Jeffrey remembers the Lord's words and leads an attack on a Russian military base. It is a miserable failure, with over half his unit killed. The Lord sends Chuck and Cliff to Jeffrey. Now, that might be like when God sent Moses and Elijah to go see Jesus. Jeffrey returns to the hills with fear and anger. Jeffrey prays and fasts. We arrive with the Lord's word. Jeffrey, I guess that would be Chuck speaking. Jeffrey takes up arms in obedience to God and goes. Russians, terror-stricken, flee before the leader of the land and his small band. Depots of arms and equipment are left behind intact. Christian Russians quit the Russian army and join with Christian Americans, forming a Christian army. The mighty move of the Holy Spirit begins to sweep the land. It's not all bad news. The year starts out with an earthquake in northern Iowa. Anyway, so that's pretty much. I know that at some point that Christian army, okay, basically routs the Russians and shoves them right off into the beach, and the country who's left is humbled and repents and seeks the Lord, and that's the end of the chapter as far as America's concerned. There's still things going on in the world after that, and I imagine it's the ramp up to Armageddon, and then the Lord returns. So there'll be, the Lord always preserves a remnant, and I pray that people will hearken to these warnings that he put out through his prophets, like Chuck and like Vicky and like Glenda Lomax and Ray Bergman and others, Steve Quayle and many others. I mean, there's been so many warnings put out, and what I'm trying to do here a little bit is compile them all into some sort of order, okay? It's a little coherent. So, anyhow. I was going to go over one more thing that this other fella, I think I might be out. Let me see. I might have missed. Oh, it's still recording. Okay. Yeah, okay. We're still on. I'll have to listen for that click. Okay, so... okay. This is from prophecyindex.org, okay? There was a fellow named Alexander B. Cuppet, okay? And he wrote a letter. He was in the military at the time. There's a picture of him here where he's, it looks like he's in Iraq, okay? I don't know if you can see that, but it looks like he's in Iraq. And